The mysterious arrival. Alex had always dreamed of exploring the stars. As a young explorer, he wanted to see things that no one had ever seen before. He had trained for years, preparing himself for the adventures that awaited him in the vastness of space. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened when his mission went wrong. His ship, the Odyssey, was meant to explore a newly discovered planet, an uncharted world, full of unknown possibilities. But a sudden meteor storm had caused a catastrophic failure in the ship's systems. Alex had tried everything he could to save the vessel, but it was too late. He had to abandon the ship and make an emergency landing on the unknown planet. The planet's atmosphere was thick with a strange greenish hue. It looked like something out of a dream or a nightmare. Alex looked out of the cockpit window and felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. He had no idea where he was. His communications were down, and the ship's navigation system had been damaged in the crash. There was no way to contact Earth, no way to call for help. He was alone. The crash site was located in the middle of a dense forest, the trees towering above him with their strange, colorful foliage. The air was heavy with the scent of unfamiliar plants. Alex knew he had to leave the wreckage before the planet's dangerous creatures found him. But as he stepped outside the safety of the ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He gathered his supplies and started walking, keeping his eyes open for any signs of life. The forest was silent, almost too silent. He didn't know what to expect, but everything felt off. The wind didn't make a sound as it moved through the leaves, and the only thing he could hear was his own footsteps crunching on the ground. Hours passed, and Alex found nothing but strange plants and unfamiliar terrain. The sun was beginning to set, and he had no shelter. He realized he would have to set up camp for the night. He wasn't sure if it was safe to sleep here, but he didn't have much of a choice. The darkness was closing in fast. That's when he saw her. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared from the trees, standing in the dim light. At first, Alex thought it was a trick of his tired mind, his eyes playing tricks on him after such a long, stressful day. But no, the figure was real. She was tall, with feathered wings extending from her back. Her skin shimmered with a faint iridescent glow, and her eyes, large and bright, shone like twin stars. She wasn't human, that was for sure, but she wasn't like anything Alex had ever seen before. He stood frozen, unsure whether to run or to approach her. The alien girl didn't speak at first. She just stood there, watching him with an unreadable expression on her face. Alex felt a strange pull toward her, a sense of calm and wonder. Despite the confusion and danger of the situation, he didn't feel threatened by her. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of curiosity about who she was, where she came from, and what she wanted. She finally broke the silence, her voice soft and melodic, though Alex couldn't understand a word she said. He blinked in surprise. The words didn't sound like any language he knew, and yet, somehow, he could sense the meaning behind them. She wasn't hostile. She seemed friendly. The alien girl tilted her head, as though studying him, and then she reached out with one delicate hand, as if offering something. Alex hesitated for a moment, but then stepped forward, his instincts telling him that this strange encounter was important. When his hand touched hers, something strange happened. It was as though an electric current shot through his body. A warm, tingling sensation spread from his fingers all the way up his arm. The alien girl didn't seem surprised by this reaction, though. She merely smiled, as if she had been expecting it. After a moment, she withdrew her hand and pointed toward the distant hills. Alex glanced in the direction she was indicating, but there was nothing obvious there, just more dense forest. He turned back to her, his mind racing. What did she want? What was she trying to show him? The alien girl's expression softened, and then she gestured for him to follow her. Alex stood for a moment, torn between fear and curiosity. His logical mind told him to stay put, to be cautious. But something inside him, something deep and unexplainable, urged him to follow her. With a final glance at the wreckage of his ship, Alex made up his mind. He wasn't sure what awaited him in the darkness of this alien forest, but he knew that following this mysterious creature might be his only chance of survival. Maybe she could help him get back to his mission. Maybe she had answers. And so, without another word, he followed her into the forest, his heart racing and his mind full of questions. What kind of creature was she? Where had she come from? And what did this strange, feathered alien want with him? The answers, Alex hoped, would come soon. But as they moved deeper into the alien woods, one thing was certain. He would never forget this mysterious arrival, and the strange alien girl who seemed to know more about him than he did himself. The unexpected encounter. The deep forest was alive with strange sounds, and Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mixed with uncertainty as he followed the feathered alien girl through the dense underbrush. The night had fallen quickly, and the only light came from the bioluminescent plants that dotted the landscape, casting an eerie glow over everything. He could hear the occasional rustle of leaves, the fluttering of wings in the distance, and the soft, rhythmic hum of alien creatures that seemed to inhabit this world. But most of all, it was quiet, unnervingly quiet, save for his footsteps and the girl's soft movements ahead. The alien girl moved with grace, her wings shifting lightly behind her. Alex couldn't stop staring at them. The feathers seemed to shimmer under the glowing light of the plants, and they looked almost alive, like they were part of her very being. The way she moved, so effortlessly, was like nothing Alex had ever seen before. She wasn't walking as much as she was floating, as though the air itself was carrying her. Alex could barely keep up, trying to navigate the unfamiliar terrain without tripping over roots and rocks. Every time he looked back, the crash site seemed to be getting farther away, swallowed by the alien forest. The feeling of isolation crept over him again, but it was different this time. It wasn't just the fact that he was stranded in an unknown world. It was the sensation that he was moving further away from what he knew. The fear was still there, but it had morphed into something else, something he couldn't quite place. Was it curiosity? Wonder? Or was it something deeper? After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. The moonlight broke through the canopy, casting silver beams across the ground, illuminating a strange structure ahead. It was unlike anything Alex had ever seen. A towering stone monument that seemed to pulse with a faint otherworldly glow. The alien girl moved toward it with purpose, her wings folding behind her as she approached the entrance. Alex's heart raced. He hadn't expected this. The stone structure looked ancient, older than anything on Earth, yet it was unlike any ruin he had studied. It was almost as if the monument had been built with purpose, not just to stand, but to be discovered. There was something about it that spoke to him, though he couldn't put it into words. Was it alive? Was it part of her world? Or was it something more? He hesitated, unsure whether to follow her inside. He had no idea what awaited him in this strange place, but the girl seemed to beckon him, her eyes flashing with unspoken invitation. She didn't look back this time. She simply waited, as though confident that he would follow. Swallowing his doubts, Alex stepped forward. The ground beneath him was soft and cool, like the earth was alive, and as he approached the entrance, the stone seemed to shift slightly, almost like it recognized his presence. The air inside was cooler, carrying the scent of ancient wood and something floral that made Alex's head spin for a moment. He took a deep breath and stepped into the structure, following the glowing trails that led deeper inside. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, symbols and images that Alex couldn't begin to understand. They seemed to tell a story, but it was one he couldn't grasp, no matter how hard he tried to study them. The carvings looked as though they had been made by an advanced civilization, but they weren't human. They depicted strange creatures, feathered beings, like the girl, some with wings, others without. Alex's heart beat faster as he realized that these were not just random markings. They were a history, a culture, and perhaps a warning. The girl moved deeper into the structure, undisturbed by the carvings, as though she had seen them all before. She led him through a series of narrow passages until they arrived in the center of the monument. In the center was a circular platform, surrounded by more carvings, and at the heart of the platform was a glowing orb suspended in midair. The orb emitted a soft hum, and Alex could feel the energy in the air shift as he approached. Without a word, the alien girl turned to face him, her wings fluttering slightly. She reached out, touching the orb with one hand. The moment her fingers made contact, the orb flashed brightly, and the hum grew louder, more intense. Alex instinctively took a step back, startled by the sudden surge of energy. He could feel the air around him crackling with power, and it was as if the monument itself was awakening. The girl glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. There was something in her eyes, though something that made Alex's chest tighten. She wasn't just an alien from another world. She was something more, something important. Her presence here, her actions, were not by accident. She had led him here for a reason, and Alex suddenly felt that the stakes were higher than he could have imagined. Before he could ask her what was going on, the orb's light dimmed, and the energy in the room settled. The girl withdrew her hand, and the soft hum faded to a faint pulse. It was as if the moment had passed, and yet something had changed. Alex didn't know what it was, but he could sense it, an unspoken connection between them, something that went beyond mere survival. There was a reason they had crossed paths. She turned to him again, her eyes meeting his with a calm intensity. Slowly, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You are not like the others." Alex blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Her gaze seemed to deepen, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes, something close to hope. "You have a purpose here, Alex," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A purpose that will change everything." Alex's heart skipped a beat. Was she talking about his mission? Or was she referring to something far greater, something that involved him, this alien world, and possibly the fate of both? He didn't know, but he felt that he was about to find out. The room seemed to grow heavier with the weight of her words, and as Alex stood there, trying to understand what she had just revealed, one thing was clear: his life had changed in ways he never expected. And the strange, feathered alien girl, Tessa, was at the heart of it all. The strange connection. Days passed since Alex's first encounter with the feathered alien girl, Tessa. The strange monument had revealed more questions than answers, but one thing was certain: his life was no longer the same. He wasn't just stranded on an unknown planet anymore. He was part of something much bigger. The feeling of destiny tugged at him like an invisible thread, pulling him deeper into the mysteries of this alien world and his growing connection with Tessa. She had led him back to her home, a hidden village nestled within the heart of the forest. It wasn't much like the places Alex had seen in his travels, no towering structures or modern technology, but there was an undeniable beauty to it. The buildings were crafted from stone and wood, woven together with the natural elements around them. The village seemed to breathe with life, its people living in harmony with the strange, bioluminescent flora and fauna that flourished around them. The villagers were like Tessa, feathered beings with wings and iridescent skin that shimmered softly in the twilight. They didn't speak much to Alex, but there was no hostility in their eyes. Instead, they watched him with a quiet curiosity, as though he was the one who didn't belong. The language barrier made communication difficult, but Tessa was always there to translate, her voice soothing as she explained things to him in a way that made him feel less like an outsider. Over the days, Alex grew more accustomed to the village. He learned how to navigate the winding paths, how to interact with the local wildlife, and how to survive in this strange, alien world. But more than that, he found himself drawn to Tessa in ways he couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just her beauty or the mystery that surrounded her. It was something deeper, an unspoken understanding, a shared sense of isolation that neither of them had ever experienced before. Tessa would often take him to the forest at night, showing him the hidden wonders of the planet. There were creatures that glowed like stars, flowers that opened only under the moonlight, and rivers that sparkled with a light of their own. Each time they ventured into the wilderness, Alex felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. With her, the loneliness of being stranded on an alien world didn't seem so overwhelming. In fact, it felt like he had found something far more important, a purpose. One evening, as they walked through the dense trees, Tessa stopped suddenly, her head tilted slightly as she looked up at the sky. Alex followed her gaze, noticing the two moons hanging low in the sky, their light casting a pale glow over the forest. He didn't ask her what she was thinking. He had learned that sometimes silence was the best way to understand her. Tessa's wings fluttered softly, and she turned to face him. She seemed more serious tonight, her eyes deeper than usual, as though she were carrying a heavy weight. Alex could feel the change in the air, the shift in her mood. Something was different, and it felt like she was finally ready to share whatever it was that had been on her mind. "Alex," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the whispering wind. "There is something you need to know." He glanced at her, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had a feeling that whatever she was about to say would change everything. "I wasn't always like this," Tessa continued, her gaze drifting to the forest floor. "My people, we once lived in peace, but something happened. A long time ago, we made a choice, one that has haunted us ever since." Alex watched her closely, his curiosity piqued. He stepped a little closer, though he didn't interrupt. Tessa needed to speak, and he didn't want to rush her. "There is a prophecy," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A prophecy that speaks of a time when our species will be tested, when the balance of our world will be in danger, and only one will have the power to save us." She paused, and for a moment, Alex wondered if she was having second thoughts about sharing this with him. But then she looked at him, her eyes filled with an intense mix of fear and hope. "You're part of that prophecy," she said, her words heavy with meaning. Alex felt his chest tighten, a wave of confusion washing over him. "What do you mean? How am I part of it?" Tessa stepped back, her wings folding behind her as she raised her hand to touch the glowing stone around her neck. The stone pulsed softly, and Alex noticed for the first time how it seemed to resonate with the planet itself, as if it was connected to everything around them. "Before you came here, I didn't understand it either," Tessa explained. "But when I met you, I felt it. A connection. A bond that neither of us can explain. This is why I brought you here." She paused again, as if searching for the right words. "The egg that I carry, it is not just any egg. It is the key to our future. If it hatches, if the hatchling survives, it will bring about a new age for my people. But there is a great danger in that. If we fail, we risk destroying everything we've worked for." Alex felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. The egg. He had noticed the way she had been guarding it, the way she had carried it so carefully ever since their first meeting. But he hadn't understood its significance. Now he was beginning to realize that this wasn't just a matter of survival. This was a battle for an entire species, and he was caught in the middle of it. "So, what does this have to do with me?" Alex asked, trying to make sense of everything. Tessa looked at him, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of hope and fear. "I don't know exactly, but I believe you have a role to play in all of this. The prophecy speaks of a human, someone from your world, who will help us, someone who will give us the strength we need to survive." Alex didn't know what to say. He had come here thinking he was just another explorer on a routine mission, and now he found himself wrapped up in a prophecy, a mysterious alien girl, and an egg that could decide the fate of an entire species. It was too much to process. But as he looked into Tessa's eyes, he saw something he hadn't noticed before, a deep, unwavering trust. She was placing her faith in him, and that meant something. He didn't know how or why he was part of this prophecy, but for the first time since his ship had crashed on this strange planet, he felt like he wasn't alone. Whatever the future held, Alex knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn away from Tessa now. He was in this, and whatever came next, he would face it with her by his side. The revelation. The days following Tessa's revelation were filled with a quiet yet undeniable tension. Alex couldn't stop thinking about the prophecy she had shared with him. The weight of her words pressed heavily on him, like a shadow that never left. He had arrived on this planet expecting to find new scientific data, perhaps make a few discoveries about alien life. But instead, he had found himself thrust into a story that was far more complex and dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Tessa had made it clear that the egg she carried was no ordinary egg. It was the key to saving her people. But what she hadn't shared, until now, was the true significance of the egg's hatching. Alex knew that the moment the egg opened, something would change forever. The hatchling, whatever it was, had the potential to either heal their world or destroy it. And according to Tessa, the prophecy spoke of someone from Earth, who would help ensure the egg's survival, even though Alex had no idea what role he was supposed to play. Every time he saw her cradling the egg, the same thought echoed in his mind. How could something so small and fragile hold the fate of an entire species? Tessa had begun to spend more time with him, showing him the ways of her people, how they lived, how they communicated, how they honored the natural world around them. Their connection had deepened over the days, and the trust between them had grown stronger. But there was still so much about this alien world that Alex didn't understand, and even more that Tessa hadn't shared. One evening, as the two of them sat by a fire outside the village, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the ground, Tessa seemed quieter than usual. Her wings, usually so graceful and expressive, were tucked close to her body, and her eyes were distant. Alex could tell that something was weighing on her. "Is something wrong?" he asked softly, breaking the silence between them. Tessa didn't respond right away. She simply stared into the fire, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the flames. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice low and filled with sorrow. "There's more to the prophecy than I've told you," she said quietly. "The egg. It's not just a gift. It's a curse." Alex furrowed his brow, his confusion growing. "A curse? I thought it was meant to save your people." Tessa nodded slowly, her wings twitching with unease. "It is, but it's also dangerous. The prophecy speaks of the one who will help the hatchling survive, but it also speaks of those who will come to stop it. They will do anything to prevent the egg from hatching. There are forces at work that want to see us destroyed, and those who help the hatchling are as much a target as the egg itself." Alex's heart sank as he processed her words. He had known that danger lurked on this planet, but he hadn't fully understood the extent of it. It wasn't just about protecting the egg. It was about surviving the forces that would stop them at any cost. Alex's own life and Tessa's were at risk. "Who are these forces?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are they so determined to stop the egg from hatching?" Tessa hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether or not to share more. She took a deep breath and then spoke, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "There are factions within my own people, those who believe the hatchling will bring nothing but destruction. They want to destroy the egg before it hatches. They believe that the balance of our world must be maintained, and that the hatchling will tip it into chaos. There are others who are not from our world, but have made it their mission to interfere with our fate. They want to see us fall." Alex stared at her, his mind racing. He had come to this planet thinking he would simply be a witness to alien life, but now he was entangled in a conflict that spanned far beyond his understanding. Not only did he have to help protect the egg, but he also had to protect Tessa and himself from those who would do whatever it took to stop the prophecy from coming true. "What do we do?" Alex asked, his voice firm despite the fear creeping into his chest. How do we keep the egg safe? Tessa stood up, her wings unfurling slightly as she gazed out into the dark forest. We move quickly. The egg cannot remain here much longer. We must take it to the hidden temple. It is the only place where it can hatch safely. But it will be dangerous. The journey will not be easy. Alex stood as well, the gravity of their mission setting in. Then we leave tonight. I'll help you get the egg to the temple, no matter what it takes. Tessa turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something else, something deeper. I knew I could count on you. As they gathered their supplies and prepared for the journey, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their time was running out. The forces that wanted to destroy the egg were closer than ever, and they had no idea what they would face on the road ahead. But one thing was clear. Tessa had trusted him with the future of her world, and he couldn't let her down. As the moon rose higher in the sky, casting a cold, silvery light across the land, Alex and Tessa set out into the wilderness, the weight of the egg heavy on their shoulders. They didn't speak much as they walked. Both of them knew that the journey ahead would test them in ways they could never imagine. But Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, of destiny, guiding him forward. The forest seemed to close in around them as they ventured deeper into the unknown. The path to the hidden temple was fraught with danger, and every step they took felt like it could be their last. But Alex had no choice now. The prophecy had called him here, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. With the egg in their hands and the weight of the future on their shoulders, Alex and Tessa walked into the darkness, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The challenge. The night was colder than Alex had expected. The air carried a chill that seemed to penetrate even the thick layers of clothing he wore. The dense forest surrounding them was alive with sounds, but none of them felt comforting. The crunch of their footsteps on the forest floor echoed unnervingly in the stillness, as though the trees themselves were watching their every move. They had been walking for hours now, with no signs of civilization. Only the dim light of Tessa's glowing stone illuminated their path, casting long shadows across the underbrush. Alex's mind was racing. The journey to the hidden temple was proving to be more difficult than he had anticipated. Tessa was leading the way with surprising speed, her wings folded close to her body as she moved through the forest with quiet grace. But Alex knew that even she, with her alien agility, was not unaffected by the danger that loomed over them. Her eyes were sharp, constantly scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. The weight of the egg was ever present, and Alex could sense that something was lurking just beyond their reach. They were not alone in these woods, and he could feel the tension mounting. Tessa stopped suddenly, her wings rustling slightly as she held up a hand, signaling for Alex to halt. Her posture was tense, and her eyes narrowed as she scanned the darkness around them. Alex could see her breathing slowly, trying to steady herself. It was then that he noticed it, the faint glow of eyes watching them from the shadows. He wasn't sure how many there were, but he knew that they weren't alone. "Something's following us," Tessa murmured, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Alex's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what kind of creatures inhabited this planet, but the energy in the air had shifted, and he could feel it in his bones. This was no mere wildlife. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He knew they had to act fast. Without another word, Tessa crouched low to the ground, her wings folding tighter against her back. Alex mirrored her movements, instinctively dropping to a crouch as well. He didn't know what they were up against, but he was sure they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The sounds grew louder. Footsteps, light but deliberate, moving in sync with them. Alex couldn't tell how many there were, but it sounded like more than one. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the situation. He had to stay calm. He had to trust in Tessa. She had led them this far, and he knew she wouldn't let anything happen to him, or the egg. Suddenly, the figure emerged from the darkness, a creature, humanoid in shape but with twisted, inhuman features. Its skin was a dark, mottled green, and it had long, sharp claws that glinted under the light. Its eyes were large and glowed a faint red, and its mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth. It was one of the creatures that had been watching them, but it wasn't alone. From the shadows, more figures stepped forward, each one more grotesque than the last. They were all the same, dark-skinned, hunched over with exaggerated limbs, their glowing red eyes fixed on Alex and Tessa. There were at least 5 of them now, and they were closing in fast. The creatures seemed to move with unnatural speed, their eyes locked onto Tessa and the egg. Tessa stood up, her wings extending slightly as she turned to face the creatures. She didn't seem afraid, but there was a hard edge to her expression now, something that told Alex this wasn't just a simple encounter. These creatures weren't here by chance. They were hunting her and the egg. "You need to protect the egg, Alex," Tessa said, her voice firm. "Do not let them take it." Alex nodded, his heart pounding. He had never been in a situation like this before, and the pressure of the moment weighed heavily on him. The creatures were closing in, and Tessa was preparing to defend them. But the odds were stacked against them. There were too many enemies, and they were too close. Without warning, Tessa lunged at the nearest creature, her wings flaring wide. She moved with incredible speed, knocking the creature off balance with a single swipe of her wing. It hissed in anger, but Tessa was already moving, quick and graceful, as she dodged its claws and attacked again. The fight was chaotic, the creatures growling and snarling as they attempted to capture her. But Tessa was relentless, her movements fluid and deadly. Alex didn't waste a moment. He knew he had to act fast. He wasn't a fighter. He was an explorer, a scientist. But in this moment, he realized that survival depended on more than just intellect. He had to protect the egg. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He grabbed a sharp rock from the ground and used it to defend himself. One of the creatures lunged at him, but Alex was quicker than he expected. He thrust the rock forward, catching the creature in the side. It let out a screech of pain and staggered back, its red eyes filled with fury. But it didn't stop. It advanced again, and Alex swung the rock once more, narrowly avoiding its claws. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold out, but he knew that he couldn't back down. Tessa was still fighting, her wings beating fiercely as she took down another of the creatures. But she was slowing down. Alex could see the toll the battle was taking on her. Her movements weren't as fluid, and the creatures were getting bolder, more aggressive. "Alex, now," Tessa shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Alex's heart raced. He glanced down at the egg, which was safely tucked into a cloth wrapped around his chest. He had to get it to safety. With the creatures closing in and Tessa fighting them off, there was no time to waste. He needed to find a way to escape, and fast. In a burst of adrenaline, Alex turned and sprinted toward the dense underbrush, hoping to put some distance between him and the attackers. He could hear the creatures following him, but he didn't look back. He focused on the path ahead, trusting that Tessa would catch up. His legs burned as he ran, pushing himself harder than he ever had before. The forest was thick, and the ground was uneven, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the future of this alien world, and his own survival, depended on him. Behind him, he heard Tessa's voice again, calling his name. The creatures were still hot on their heels, but Tessa wasn't far behind. She would catch up to him. She had to. With every step, Alex knew that this was only the beginning. The journey to the hidden temple had just begun, and it would take everything they had to survive the challenges ahead. But one thing was clear. Alex was no longer just an observer. He was a part of this fight, and there was no turning back. The unexpected hero. The forest had gone eerily quiet after the battle. The creatures that had attacked them were gone, but the tension still hung thick in the air. Alex could hear the soft rustle of the leaves as the wind began to pick up, but it was a sound that did little to soothe the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. His breath came in short, uneven bursts, and his heart was racing from the fight. But there was no time to relax. They couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. The creatures could return at any moment, and the hidden temple was still miles away. Tessa stood a few feet away, her wings partially open, scanning the horizon with a vigilance that betrayed her exhaustion. Her feathers were ruffled, and there was a cut on her arm, but she didn't seem to be bothered by it. She had taken down 3 of the creatures, and although her movements were slower now, she was still standing strong. Her eyes locked onto Alex, and for a brief moment, the storm of battle seemed to calm. "You did well, Alex," Tessa said, her voice soft yet filled with an unmistakable pride. Alex didn't know how to respond. The truth was, he had been terrified. He had never fought anything before, and the rock he had used to defend himself felt like it was barely enough to fend off the creatures. But hearing Tessa's words, the quiet acknowledgement of his efforts, made him realize something. He had done it. Despite all the fear and doubt, he had survived. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, his eyes lingering on the cut on her arm. It wasn't too deep, but the blood was already beginning to dry, and Alex knew that it was far from an ideal situation. Tessa nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm fine. We don't have time to linger. We need to keep moving." Alex hesitated, unsure if she was truly okay. He wanted to help her, but she was already moving toward the path again, urging him to follow. He felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for her, something deeper than mere survival. He had to protect her. He had to protect the egg. He was part of this now, whether he wanted to be or not. They moved in silence for the next few hours, the weight of their journey pushing down on them both. The deeper they traveled into the wilderness, the more Alex realized how unprepared he had been for this mission. There were no weapons, no defenses, no easy way out. But Tessa had always known what to do. She had always been one step ahead, and Alex couldn't help but admire her for it. Finally, as the sun began to rise, they reached a clearing. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first rays of dawn creeping over the horizon, but Alex barely noticed. His focus was on the temple that stood before them. It was not what he had expected. The hidden temple was massive, but unlike anything he had imagined. It was carved directly into the side of a mountain, the stone glowing faintly with a warm golden hue. The temple's entrance was flanked by towering statues, each one depicting a feathered figure, much like Tessa, standing guard. Tessa stopped in her tracks, her wings rustling as she stared at the temple. Her expression was unreadable, and for the first time, Alex saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "This is it," she whispered, "the place where it will all change." Alex felt his chest tighten. They had made it to the temple, but the danger wasn't over yet. The forces that wanted the egg to fail were still out there, hunting them. And the moment the egg began to hatch, there would be no turning back. He turned to Tessa, meeting her gaze. "We'll make it, together." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. For the first time, Alex saw her as more than just the alien girl from another world. She was someone who had been carrying the weight of an entire species' survival on her shoulders. She was someone who had chosen to trust him, despite all the odds. They approached the temple cautiously, each step echoing in the stillness. As they passed the statues, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air around them felt thick, charged with a strange energy, as though the temple itself was alive, waiting for them. When they finally reached the entrance, Tessa turned to face Alex. "This is where we part ways. For now," she said, her voice low. "I need to take the egg inside, to the sacred chamber. Only I can do this." Alex's heart sank. "I'll go with you. I can help." Tessa shook her head, her wings rustling as she stepped closer to him. "No. The journey has always been mine to finish. You've already done more than I could have ever asked. You protected the egg. You fought for us. You're the one who will make the difference." Alex's mind raced. He wanted to help, He wanted to stay by her side, but Tessa was right. He had come here to help, to protect, and that was what he had done. He was no warrior, but in his own way, he had become a protector, something he never thought he would be. And it had been enough. "Will I see you again?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tessa smiled, her eyes sparkling with a mix of hope and sadness. "You will. You've already changed everything." And with that, she turned and walked into the temple, her wings folding behind her. Alex stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear into the shadows. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he knew one thing. The prophecy had not just been about the egg. It had been about him too. He had been brought here for a reason, and now he had to trust that whatever came next, he was ready. It was no longer about simply surviving or helping Tessa. It was about the future of an entire species, and his role in it. Alex turned and made his way to the edge of the temple, his heart heavy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead, but he had already come so far. He couldn't turn back now. He was a hero in his own way. An unexpected one, perhaps, but a hero nonetheless. And that, he realized, was enough. The ultimate sacrifice. The towering stone walls of the hidden temple loomed before Alex like a silent sentinel, standing guard over secrets that had remained hidden for centuries. The journey had been long, exhausting, and fraught with dangers that neither he nor Tessa could have predicted. Yet, here they were, standing at the very threshold of a fate neither of them fully understood. The egg, still safely nestled in the cloth wrapped around Alex's chest, pulsed softly, as though it too understood that this moment would define everything. Tessa had entered the temple alone, her wings disappearing into the shadows of the vast stone doorway. Alex had wanted to follow, to stand by her side as she completed the final steps of the prophecy, but she had insisted that this was her burden to bear alone. He couldn't argue with that, though a part of him still wished he could protect her from the immense weight of what she was about to face. Instead, Alex stood outside the temple, the chill of the morning air biting at his skin. The quiet of the forest seemed to press in on him, a heavy silence that made every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of alien birds, feel like a warning. He hadn't come this far only to fail now. He had to trust in Tessa. He had to believe that the prophecy would unfold as it was meant to. But doubt gnawed at him. What if they were wrong? What if the hatchling that would emerge from the egg wasn't the savior they believed it to be, but a destroyer, as the factions within Tessa's world had warned? What if their struggle had been in vain? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shift in the air. The ground trembled lightly beneath his feet, and a low hum reverberated from the temple's depths. Alex's heart skipped a beat. Something was happening. The egg. Without thinking, he turned and raced toward the temple, his legs pushing him faster than he had ever moved before. He reached the entrance just as the hum grew louder, the stone doors of the temple slowly grinding open. Inside, a soft golden light spilled from within, casting long shadows on the ground as though the temple itself was awakening. He stepped through the doorway and into the heart of the temple, where Tessa stood before an altar, her wings spread wide. The egg was placed gently on the stone platform in front of her, its glow now pulsating in time with her own heartbeat. The air in the chamber was thick with anticipation, and Alex could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Tessa turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. "It's time," she said softly. Her voice trembled slightly, though her posture remained strong. "The egg must hatch now, or it will be too late." Alex nodded, though the lump in his throat made it hard to speak. His eyes flicked nervously to the egg. He could sense it, feel the power emanating from it. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. Tessa reached out and placed her hand on the egg. It shuddered beneath her touch, and a brilliant light began to fill the room. The temple itself seemed to react, the walls glowing brighter as the egg cracked open, revealing the soft, pulsing light inside. Alex stepped forward, drawn by the intense energy radiating from the egg. But as the light intensified, a deep, rumbling growl echoed from the shadows of the temple. Alex froze, his eyes widening as he turned toward the sound. From the darkened corners of the chamber emerged a group of figures, humanoid, like Tessa, but their features were twisted and warped. Their eyes were cold, and their expressions were filled with malice. These were the very factions that Tessa had warned him about, the ones who believed the hatchling must not survive. "You think this will save you?" One of the figures sneered, stepping forward. His voice was a rasping hiss, like the sound of a dying animal. "The prophecy is a lie. The egg will bring nothing but ruin." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. These were the forces Tessa had spoken of, and they had arrived just in time to stop what they had worked so hard for. The temple, the egg, and everything they had fought for were now under threat. Tessa's gaze hardened, and she stepped protectively in front of the egg. "You're wrong," she said, her voice filled with unwavering conviction. "The egg will bring hope. It will save my people." The leader of the faction, his eyes glowing with a faint, malicious light, took another step forward, his hands raised in a threatening gesture. "You are a fool, Tessa. The prophecy has already failed. Your kind has no place in this galaxy." Alex felt his hands tremble, the overwhelming sense of helplessness creeping over him. He couldn't let them take the egg. He couldn't let them destroy everything they had worked for. The prophecy, Tessa, and the future of her people, they all rested on what happened in this very moment. With a surge of adrenaline, Alex pushed forward. He wasn't a warrior, but he couldn't just stand there and watch as they took everything away from Tessa. Without thinking, he grabbed a nearby stone, large and heavy, and hurled it toward one of the attackers. The stone struck the figure in the chest, knocking him back. The faction leader snarled in fury, his eyes flashing with rage. "You dare interfere with destiny," he growled. But Alex was already moving. He grabbed another stone and swung it at the leader, knocking him off balance just as Tessa lunged at him, her wings extending and sending a blast of wind that threw the attackers back. The force of her wings sent one of the attackers crashing into the temple's stone pillars. For a moment, there was chaos. Tessa fighting off the attackers, Alex defending her as best as he could. The temple seemed to shake with the intensity of the battle, the golden light from the egg flickering, as if struggling to survive amidst the conflict. But in the end, the attackers were no match for Tessa's power, nor Alex's unexpected bravery. One by one, the factions were pushed back, their plans thwarted by the sheer will of those who had chosen to fight for hope. As the last of the attackers flowed into the shadows, Alex turned back to the egg. The golden light had grown brighter, and the egg had cracked completely open, revealing a creature unlike anything Alex had ever seen. It was small, delicate, but radiating an intense energy, its body covered in shimmering feathers that seemed to reflect the very essence of the stars. The hatchling blinked its large, intelligent eyes and let out a soft, melodious sound. Tessa knelt beside it, tears welling up in her eyes as she gently stroked the hatchling's head. It's real," she whispered. "It's alive." Alex stood there in awe, the weight of everything they had gone through finally sinking in. The hatchling, the key to the prophecy, had hatched, and it was everything they had hoped for. The light in the temple grew stronger, and Alex felt something shift in the air, a sense of balance, of change, as if the entire planet was breathing with them. But as Tessa cradled the hatchling, Alex knew one final truth. The ultimate sacrifice had not just been about saving the egg, it had been about choosing to stand up, against all odds, and protect something greater than oneself. Tessa had carried this burden for so long, and now, in the final moments, it was clear the future of her world had been secured not just by her, but by the two of them together. As Alex stood there, watching Tessa and the hatchling, he realized that his journey was far from over. He had found something worth fighting for. He had found purpose, and no matter where the future led, he would continue to fight, because some stories, some destinies, were worth sacrificing everything for.